Hello, YouTube, and welcome back to another book review from me, your host, Logan Albright. And today I'm talking about The Summer Tree by Guy Gavriel Kay, the Fionavar Tapestry, Book 1. I've been trying to read more fantasy, as viewers of this channel will know. I've been trying to delve into some of the classics of the genre, some things that are deeply beloved. I'm really looking for another book that I can really fall in love with. I'm looking for something that is really going to grab me emotionally and that I'm going to really get sucked into and want to be with for a while. And I'm struggling to find it. And maybe it's because I've read too many books and it's hard, I'm kind of jaded, I'm too experienced to find new things, but I don't think that's it, because I have found several books that I loved in recent months and recent years, but they tend to be older books. They tend to be early 20th century or late 19th century books. But I really haven't found any fantasy novels that have really grabbed me. And so I'm on my quest for that. I'm trying to find something. So if you have any recommendations, let me know in the comments. This is a 1984 novel by a Canadian author, Guy Gavriel Kay. It's the first in a trilogy, and it appears to be deeply beloved, and it seems like people have very strong opinions about it and think it's wonderful. And I enjoyed it. I thought it was a reasonably good book, but I didn't love it. I didn't fall in love with it. I didn't get sucked into it. I found myself kind of having to force myself to read it at times instead of being drawn into it. And I'm trying to understand why that is. Let me just briefly outline the plot. There are 5 Canadian college students who get an invitation to be guests in this alternate dimension, basically, called Fionavar, that is like the source of all worlds. There are apparently very many different worlds, and this is like the source of all of them. And a magician or a wizard invites them to come for the anniversary of his kingdom, of his king's kingdom, rather. And they go there and they find all is not well. There's a drought that's been going on for a long time because the king has refused to sacrifice himself on the summer tree, which you have to do when there's trouble in the kingdom. And he's neglecting his duty and not doing that. There's a succession crisis among the king's sons, who's going to inherit the throne. There's some kind of courtly intrigue. And then along the way, we kind of meet all the different characters and the different tribes and different peoples of the world, and you learn about the world. There's a magic system which involves wizards having what they call a source, which is someone who is bound to them, and it's sort of like a marriage. It's sort of like a parasitic relationship. It doesn't seem like it's 100% fun and games, but this is the magic system and how it works. You have to draw on someone else's energy in order to use magic. And so you kind of, the characters sort of get to know themselves and see how they adapt into this new world and figure out what's going on. And so admittedly, I've only read the first book in the trilogy, and I get criticized for this in my comments. People say, you haven't read the whole thing, you can't have an opinion on it yet. But I think that's ridiculous, because look at Game of Thrones. Are you saying it's never going to be finished? Are you saying nobody can ever have an opinion on Game of Thrones because it's not finished? You can have an opinion on things that you haven't finished. And I finished the first volumes of things, if it's a series. And this is a problem I have with fantasy, is everything tends to be long series of 10, 20, 50 books that I have to read. And I don't have the time or the inclination to do that. So if it's a series that I really get sucked into and really want to keep reading, I will keep reading it. But if it's not, why am I going to waste my time continuing to read 10 books in a row of something that I'm not that interested in? So I read the first book to see if it grabs me, and then I decide whether I want to read on. And I've only read the first book in this, so maybe I am not getting the full picture, and maybe it gets much better as it goes along. And I did find things I like about it, but it didn't really suck me in. I didn't get emotionally invested in it, and I didn't get emotionally invested in the characters. The characters felt very kind of passive and flat to me in a lot of ways. They felt like first of all, in the first chapter, they get invited to come to this fantasy world by someone who they thought was a visiting professor at their college, but turns out to be a wizard. And they just don't seem fazed by it. They don't seem to first of all, why are they saying yes to this? They're like, oh, okay, I guess we'll do that. It doesn't seem like it's a big enough deal to them. And when they get there, they don't seem amazed by anything. They don't I was reading reviews on Goodreads right before I did this review to see what other people had to say about it. And one person said that there was no sense of wonder in the novel. And I really think I felt that as well. The world doesn't really feel that magical. They don't seem that impressed by it. They're just kind of oh, another day at the office. Go to this fantasy world and see what's up. Try to solve these people's problems. So I really didn't feel their motivations didn't seem real to me. The reasons for their actions didn't seem real or convincing to me in that sense. So I had a problem with that. The characters seem a little bit interchangeable in terms of personality. I didn't get a huge differentiation between them. I always like I do this little test in my head sometimes where it's like, if you read a line of dialogue and you don't know who says it, can you tell who says it just by the line of dialogue rather than by the tag that tells you who said it? And if you can't, then maybe your characters aren't well defined enough. And you can't always do this. Even in great books, you can't always do this. But like, I think that if you really want to have well defined characters, you should be able to tell who's talking by their tone, the vocabulary they use, the style of speech they use, whether they stammer, whether they have any kind of verbal tics or anything. Like, just give them something to kind of let you know, and just their point of view and their outlook on the world, their philosophy on life. You should be able to tell by what they're saying who that character is. And I feel like these are just sort of interchangeable. Five is just a convenient number to put in there. And I didn't feel like we got to know them all that well. And again, maybe you get to know them better as you go along. But I don't know. I didn't care about these characters, and I didn't really care what happened to them. They seemed a little cold and distant and not that invested in the world. So that was sort of a problem I had with it. And then I think a lot of fantasy authors do this. They just focus so much on like world building and coming up with their different regions and different tribes and countries and kingdoms and different types of races that live in the world and different languages that live in the world and all this stuff. And then like the politics of the world, the different kingdoms and how they relate to each other, these little internal squabbles for power. All that is fine, but like I feel like that often comes at the expense both of story and of character. Like, you don't get a really interesting, compelling story because they're spending so much time telling you what the world is like. And you don't get very interesting, compelling characters because they're telling you about the background and history and politics of the thing. So I don't know. It's just not grabbing me. And I'm thinking about this because I recently reread The Lord of the Rings for the 7th time, my favorite book. And I was reading The Return of the King, and I was moved to the point of tears 3 times in that book, 1 volume alone. It's just like this. I care so much about these characters. I love this world so much. This story has such weight in my heart that it really affects me when I read it. Even though I've read it 7 times, I'm not bored of it. I'm not sick of it. I'm not blasé about it. I'm just like totally invested every time I read it. And I realize that's a high bar to compare anything to. There's a quote on the cover of this edition that's like, "This is the only fantasy novel that doesn't suffer in comparison to The Lord of the Rings." And I think it does suffer in comparison to The Lord of the Rings because I just don't feel that emotional connection to it that I'm looking for and trying to feel. And I know a lot of people do, and a lot of people may get mad at me for this review and saying this. This is just my opinion, I'm not presenting myself as some kind of expert or professional reviewer. I'm not trying to say, this is a good book objectively or this is a bad book objectively. I'm not trying to yuck on your yum. If you love it, I'm happy for you and I want you to love it. I'm just expressing what I thought of it. And, maybe if other people are thinking about reading it, they can decide whether they want to read it based on my opinion, if they have similar tastes in literature to me. But I'm really not trying to badmouth the author or badmouth the book, because there were things I liked about it, and I thought it was generally well written, and I liked the prose style, and I thought the world building was very inventive and very creative, and I enjoyed some of that. But yeah, I'm thinking that maybe fantasy just isn't my genre, because I've been doing this for a while, and I keep reading fantasy novels trying to find something that I love as much as Tolkien, and I'm just not finding anything. It all is leaving me kind of cold. The exceptions have been Mervyn Peake's Gormenghast, which is only kind of like fantasy adjacent. It's not strictly fantasy, but I totally loved that series. And then some of the Elric stuff that I've read, which I have more Elric stories to read, which I haven't got to yet. But I started reading some of the Elric saga, and I found that really compelling. Oh, and Paul Anderson's The Broken Sword. I really loved that one too. So there are a few fantasy novels that I've really fallen in love with and really think are great, but I'm just struggling to find things that really connect with me. And so maybe I'll move on from fantasy. In fact, I know I will move on from fantasy, at least for a little while, because guess what's coming up? Halloween, spooky season, October, my favorite time of year. And as I said in my last video, if you didn't watch that one, my plan for October is to do 4 volumes of scary short stories, 1 for each week in the month. And I will talk about each of those, assuming that I have enough time to actually get the reading done. I will also be preparing for National Novel Writing Month in November, which comes up, which I do every year. So there's that. I was also planning on doing a Blu-ray haul of horror movies, because I buy horror movies every year, add them to my collection, and I was going to talk about that. But the stupid post office lost like 70% of the horror movies that I ordered. and they claim to have delivered them, but they did not deliver them. So I don't really have much of a Blu-ray haul, so maybe I won't do that. But that's my plans for the rest of the month, and I hope you will join me and watch some of those videos. If you're interested in horror short stories and you want to hear about some good ones, I don't know that they're good yet. I haven't read them yet, but I think some of them are going to be good because I know some of the authors and I like them. So that's what I thought about the Summer Tree. If you too are kind of not digging fantasy, you might enjoy October more than you have enjoyed September. So stick around and I'll try to release one every month. The Summer Tree by Guy Gavriel Kay, fine, but just didn't stick with me the way I was hoping it would. I also have a couple other fantasy novels on my shelf, on my to-be-read list that I will get to eventually, but I'm taking a break for now and we're going to do horror next. So that's my review. I didn't have too much to say about it, for which I apologize, but it just didn't leave that deep of an impression on me. So I really didn't feel like I had a lot to talk about. I will be back next week. We will start October. We'll start spooky season. It's going to be fantastic. I hope you will join me. And until then, thanks for watching, and I will catch you next time.